The Rockets defense unable to slow down the Miami Heat, and why they need better production from Alperen Şengün and Ime Thompson. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now the #1 sports podcasting network. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets. On today's show, talking about the Rockets 115-105 loss to the Miami Heat. We'll talk about some of the offensive issues, some of the defensive issues, talk about the production from both Alperen Şengün and Ime Thompson and why that just flat out needs to be better. Also, Reed Sheppard getting the starting nod over the injured Jabari Smith Jr. We'll talk about his role in the starting lineup and a lot of other things to get to from this one. First, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. And as always, thanks so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. 115-105 final score. And funny enough, this wasn't really a game in which it felt like the Heat did anything in particular demonstrably better than what the Rockets did. Rockets struggled offensively a bit more in this one than they did. They really struggled to try and solve the zone defense that Miami threw out there for large portions of this game, daring them to beat them from the perimeter, and they just couldn't do it consistently. Only 9 made three-pointers, 25% from deep for the Rockets, 43% shooting overall, 67% at the free throw line. Those numbers conversely from the Heat, 50% overall shooting, 35% from deep, 70% at the free throw line. I mean, basically dead even in second chance points and fast break points. In fact, the Rockets technically had the edge in both those categories by 1 or 2 points apiece. It was the points in the paint battle that Miami flat out dominated, 66-50. And you had Bam Adebayo, Kel'el Ware really doing a lot of damage in the paint, a lot of rebounding numbers there. And this is where this leads me to my very first point. Now, this point applies to both Alperen Şengün and Ime Thompson, but in different ways. And so I want to use this game as a moment to just zoom out a little bit, and starting with Alperen Şengün. Alpi just needs to flat out be better. I don't care if that's reductive or boring or whatever. It's the truth. He needs to be better. He hasn't been consistently at the level that this Rockets team needs him to play at for a while now. He'll have some good games here or there for sure, but he has not been what you've needed out of a number 2, out of a co-star for Kevin Durant consistently throughout the season. Now, I say that with the caveat that I think for any big man to truly flourish and thrive, they need adequate guard play on the offensive end to be able to take some of that pressure off and to be able to set them up and things of that nature. Hell, even as good as Nikola Jokic is, right, he still needs Jamal Murray. That 2-man game is everything for the Nuggets. Rockets do not have a singular player that can run a truly effective 2-man game with Alperen Şengün yet this season. The 2-man game between KD and Şengün it's all right at times and it works, but KD's not a point guard, right? He doesn't get the ball to Şengün in the spots that he really needs it to be truly successful offensively. And we saw this last season with Jalen Green, right? Where the 2-man game between Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün, on paper, those two guys should have been a perfect complement for one another, but Jalen could never really master the ball handler side of running a pick and roll and consistently getting the ball to Alpi in his spots. That's why missing Fred VanVleet hurts so much, because having Fred is a guy that can spoon feed Alperen Şengün the ball in pick and roll and get him into his spots and really take some of that pressure off offensively, feeding him some, 2, 3, 4 easy buckets here or there throughout a game, getting him in his spots, getting him when he's got a deep sea. Having a point guard means everything. So, and that's an issue that applies to this whole Rockets team, but in particular, I think that not having Fred VanVleet probably impacts Alperen Şengün on an individual basis the most, more than any other player on this Rockets team, unless you want to count Kevin Durant basically playing point guard or handling the rock a lot more than he normally would as being impacted. But I say that to say there are things to count. There are things that you have to take into consideration here. But even outside of that, Alperen Şengün has not been the best version of himself consistently enough for this Rockets team this season. Offensively, he started out the year strong, and it looked like he was about to make that all-NBA caliber leap, taking the jump into the next echelon of NBA player. Looked like he was going to become a true three-level scorer with the three ball. He was playing out of his mind for those first 20 games, saucing up Giannis, like all sorts of crazy stuff, right? And then it's like he just completely came cratering back down to earth. He still has strong games. He's still averaging, basically 29 and 6 on the season. Like that's still all-star level production. But the three-point shooting has come crashing back down, right? He's not a three-level scorer. The shooting touch in and around the basket, even out to the mid-range, hasn't consistently been there this season. I mean, the touch concern issues are back and louder than ever before with his inability to finish consistently around the rim. And even more concerning than the offensive stuff, right? Because the offensive stuff, sometimes it's just an off night, whatever. And obviously not having Fred, not having a point guard, not having that layer to the offense certainly hurts everybody, but in particular, it hurts Alperen Şengün a lot. The defense, man. Alperen Şengün's defense, he spent the last 2 years dispelling the notion that he couldn't play defense, right? Like, was part of a top 10 defense that first year under Ime, helped anchor a top 5 defense last season. And then we witnessed across an entire 7-game series some of the most aggressive defense ever imagined to try and stop Steph Curry in a playoff series. And Alperen Şengün was a part of that and was a big part of the Rockets' bizarro zone defense with the double big lineup and Steven Adams out there and all this stuff. Şengün wasn't played off the court with Steph Curry. No, in fact, counter that, he was a big part of why that zone defense worked so well, with him flying around the perimeter and being able to switch out onto Steph Curry and not get cooked out on an island and all sorts of that crazy stuff, right? We witnessed that. We saw that for the last 2 years. That has not been the version of Alperen Şengün defensively that this Rockets team has gotten most nights this season. It hasn't been. And in particular from this game, right? The damage that Bam Adebayo and Kel'el Ware were able to wreak with their size on this Rockets team, the rebounding numbers, 15 rebounds for Kel'el Ware, 11 rebounds for Bam Adebayo, just 6 boards for Alperen Şengün, only 2 defensive rebounds. The Heat had 14 offensive rebounds as a team, and your 5-man out there in Alperen Şengün could only snag 2 defensive rebounds the whole game. That just flat out can't happen. He had the fewest rebounds of any Rockets starter in this game. Reed Sheppard had more rebounds, had more defensive rebounds than Alperen Şengün did in this game. That's inexcusable for your big on the floor. It is. And this was a game where clearly the Rockets were sorely missing Jabari's size and length and his rebounding ability and all that. Talk about that a little bit more later on. But Şengün just flat out needs to be better. He does. And it's not that what I'm asking is unrealistic, because we've seen it. We've seen him be the anchor of a top 5 defense. We've seen him play like an all-NBA caliber big man on the offensive side. We've seen him outplay the likes of Giannis and Jokic and Embiid, and feels weird throwing whatever, Gobert. Like, I don't know. Just because Gobert's defensively dominant, but whatever. Like, we've seen Şengün be the best player on the floor with other perennial all-stars, first ballot Hall of Famers, some of the best to ever touch a basketball and lace them up. And he hasn't been that consistently this season. Now, sure, you factor in some of the coaching issues, right? Lineup stuff. How can Şengün be effective when he's being fielded lineups that feature Clint Capela and Ime Thompson and Dorian Finney-Smith and Josh Okogie, right? And defenses are just sagging in, daring the Rockets to beat them. Sure. I completely understand that. None of that has any impact on his ability to play defense at a respectable level. And there have been far too many games where Alperen Şengün's defense has been almost flat out embarrassingly bad this season. And he's bringing back the notion that, oh, maybe he can't play defense, right? Maybe he is a defensive liability. And all that hard work over the last 2 years has seemingly gone out the window. And it does make me wonder how important and how integral, right, Fred and Dylan were to Alp's motivation, right, his drive to be elite on the defensive side of the floor. There was a point last season where we were considering Alperen Şengün as a legitimate two-way force because he was legitimately a two-way impact player with how good he was defensively at times for the Rockets last season. He has been far, far from that this year. And that needs to change, not just for this season, but going forward. For Alperen Şengün, if he wants to be at the all-NBA caliber level, if he wants to be considered one of the legitimate best centers in the NBA, he cannot be a defensive liability while also only giving you 13 points on 14 shots and 3 assists and 3 turnovers. This loss is not squarely on Alperen Şengün's shoulders. Far from it. There were a lot of other things that I could point to in this loss, but this just felt like as good of an opportunity as any to basically highlight Şengün needs to be the number 2 star for this team, and he hasn't been the number 2 star consistently enough for this Rockets squad. So wanted to address that right out of the gate because it felt like as good a time as any to kind of handle that. I also do want to talk a little bit about Ime Thompson and where his production has been at and why his production also needs to be better for this Rockets team. We'll also get into some of what Miami ultimately did in this game that caused the Rockets trouble. We'll talk about Reed Sheppard starting in place of Jabari Smith Jr., all that good stuff. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. March is the time to celebrate women, especially around International Women's Day, and to recognize just how much they carry at work, in relationships, in families, and in all the unseen roles they step into every single day. It's easy to celebrate women's strength, but it's just as important to make space for their emotional well-being, and therapy can be one way to do that. The way women do so much for us in our daily lives. My mom is the most important person in my whole life. And I wouldn't be the person I am today without her unconditional love and support. And the women in our lives deserve support too. And therapy can help create balance and offer a space to focus on themselves. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 6 million people served worldwide, BetterHelp makes getting started simple. You fill out a short questionnaire, they match you with a licensed therapist, and if it's not the right fit, you can switch at any time. Your emotional well-being matters. Find support and feel lighter in therapy. Sign up and get 10% off at BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. That's BetterHelp, BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. Continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. The other element that I want to talk about here, and this feels like, again, this isn't really, I mean, it is and it's not. This game feels as good of an opportunity as any to talk about it because Ime Thompson, like Şengün, was also a minus 18 in this game. In particular, because Ime Udoka, for whatever reason, has decided that those two need to be attached at the hip as far as the lineups and rotations and substitution patterns go. But Ime Thompson, 20 points on 7 of 16 shooting in this game, 0 of 1 at the three-point line, just 6 of 12 at the free throw line, so a flat 50% there. Did have 11 rebounds, 4 assists, and a steal, also 4 turnovers, though, so it's like a flat 1-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio for both Şengün and Ime Thompson is not it. That's not great. But there were a lot of expectations placed on Ime Thompson this season as well. And I do think, just like with Alperen Şengün, there's context to be had here. Ime Thompson has not elevated his play this season the way in which I think a lot of Rockets fans would have hoped that he would have, you know, that kind of supposed year 3 leap, if you will. And a big part of that has been, you guessed it, the loss of Fred VanVleet. And also him being kind of pigeonholed into this point guard role that clearly is not working. Like I don't know why the Rockets are so hell-bent on this idea of Ime Thompson initiating offense and bringing the ball up and starting sets and all this, but it's not working. We have more than enough evidence to show us that it is not the right way for Ime Thompson to play basketball and for him to be the best version of himself. At this point, it's doing more of a disservice than anything, because the Rockets as a collective team don't look as functional when Ime Thompson is running the offense. There's still moments where he's Ime Thompson, I think at his peak is going to be an absolutely incredible secondary creator in the offense, right? Like Let him attack a defense that is already scrambling. Let him cut out of the corners. Let him play out of the dunker spot. Let him be a screener. Let him do all sorts of things that he can be really great and effective at offensively. But initiating offense is not one of them. Running pick and roll is not one of them, because the spacing is just abhorrent every single time. And this and the Rockets have just, I guess, dedicated themselves. Maybe they said they would do it for the whole season. I don't know. But the fact that we have this much of a sample size of it and they continue to do it is, frankly, it's hilarious. But like seeing Ime Thompson and Reed Sheppard both in the game, and Ime Thompson is the one initiating offense instead of Reed Sheppard, is kind of laughable at this point. It really is. And so some of this has to do with guys not being utilized to their maximum potentials, right? I mentioned it with Sengun, with some of the lineups that feature a bunch of non-shooters. With Ime Thompson, the same can be said there. Also with him being the point guard on a team that doesn't have proper floor spacing, there's still a role for Ime Thompson to potentially be, right, a primary ball handler and a primary point guard and, you know, initiating offense and all that. But it has to be under very specific circumstances. And those circumstances are going to be 5-out spacing. Those circumstances are going to be you put 4 shooters alongside Ime Thompson and let him use his athleticism and get downhill and be awesome. And that would probably look really, really good. And it has looked really, really good in the stretches where the Rockets have actually had the personnel to field a 5-man lineup that can do that stuff. But the reality of the situation is there are glaring weaknesses in Ime Thompson's game that get routinely exposed by opposing teams. And the Miami Heat running zone for basically 3/4 of this game speaks volumes to that, right? Teams don't run zone that aggressively and that frequently unless you are just an awful team that can't shoot from the perimeter and you've got multiple guys that aren't threats to break down your defense. Like seeing how the Rockets just struggled. It was a basic zone. And in fact, they actually did a decent job at times of getting the ball to the middle and finding decent looks in the zone. They just couldn't convert on a number of them. The Rockets got a decent number of good wide open looks out of trying to break down the zone and just couldn't capitalize. But the reason the Heat feel that they can run a zone against the Rockets is when you have a lineup out there of, again, Sengun and Ime and Clint Capela and Dorian Finney-Smith, who's shooting 25% from 3 on the year. You don't care if anybody in that lineup shoots threes. So you just run a zone defense and you protect the hell out of the paint. And that's exactly what the Miami Heat did, while bludgeoning the Rockets in the paint on the other side, because they had very little resistance on the interior because of the poor play from Alperen Şengün, the absence of Jabari Smith Jr., and the very little size outside of that, right? Clint Capela, as good as he's been in some of his recent games, was not really much of a factor, if at all, down low defensively in this one. And so I think some of this has to do with, you know, coaching. Some of it has to do with guys being miscast and not really maximizing their individual talents that they bring to the table, like Sengun, like Ime Thompson. A lot can be said for those two in particular, right? And how this coaching staff hasn't truly maximized them. And I do think ultimately playing those two guys together only works in one very specific context. And the context in which it works is you put Alperen Şengün either in pick and roll, or you give him the ball and let him post up or face up and ISO, whatever. And Ime has to be in the dunker spot, or at the very least in the corner where he can cut out of the corner. But so many of the Rockets' offensive sets where they initiate offense and Amen's just floating off the perimeter, or he's the guy initiating the offense, the defense just doesn't care about him. And it becomes so repetitive and exhausting to witness on a game-to-game basis because the talent's there. Like, Ime Thompson has so much talent, but it doesn't feel like it's really being utilized or directed in the right way. And on top of that, I think that this role that Ime Thompson is in is a disservice to him. He has not been anywhere near the same level of defender that he was last year. Ime Thompson was, bar none, arguably the best easily the best perimeter defender in the NBA last season, period, point blank. Arguably the best overall defender in the NBA last season, pound for pound. He has not been anywhere near that this year. In fact, I honestly wouldn't be shocked if Amin Thompson doesn't land on one of the 2 all-defensive teams this year. He's been good. He's been above average. He has not been, I think consistently, he has not been one of the 10 best defenders in the NBA this season. Part of it is you see that like the quad issue is still giving him some trouble. He is not his usual 110% bursty self right now. But that's a side effect of the usage and how the Rockets have elected to deploy him this season. His overall workload is so much greater this year, trying to learn the point guard position and trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, all that. Just let Amin be Amin. The version of Amin Thompson that the Rockets were utilizing last season, the version from when he stepped into the starting lineup to the final buzzer of Game 7 against the Warriors, that version of Amin Thompson, you just let him play that style of basketball with the right pieces around him. That's a year in, year out all-star, a first ballot, or a first team all defensive guy every single season, a guy that might pick up 1 or 2 DPOY awards in his career, depending on availability of the award, since that's probably just we could probably just rename it the Wemby Award when it's all said and done. But utilizing him in that context is what made him so special last season. And the Rockets have just completely gone away from it. And we circle back to coaching on that one, right? Some of it's by necessity because they needed to pivot with no Fred VanVleet, sure. But they could have pivoted in a number of different directions. And instead, they pivoted to the one thing that feels like it's clunky and doesn't consistently work, which is Amin Thompson at point guard. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad they tried it. I'm glad we saw it for more than just a short 10, 20 game sample size. I'm glad that we have a full season worth of data to basically look at and be like, yep, Amin Thompson as a point guard, pretty clunky, probably not going to be the thing that wins you a championship anytime soon. And I'm not completely ruling out the possibility. He's still young. He can still get better. But at this point, it feels like a disservice to the team, to the fans, to everybody to have him continue in that role. And he's going to have to continue doing it because the Rockets chose to not go make any moves at the deadline or pick anybody up or any of that stuff. Maybe they go get somebody on the buyout market, possibly. But he's going to continue in that role because they have no other choice this season. But moving forward in his developmental timeline as a player, he will be better served moving back into an off-ball role, a secondary creator role, letting him do the things that made him such a special player before this season. And again, it feels very not too dissimilar from the Alperen Şengün stuff, where it's like we've seen some of what Amin Thompson's capable of in a different context, right? Different role, different supporting players around him, right? Different pieces plugged in around him. And that's the version of Amin Thompson that gave Rockets fans a ton of hope and optimism for the future. And he just hasn't been that version of Amin Thompson consistently this season. So how do you get back to that version? You put all the pieces in the right spots again, and then suddenly you can maximize Amin and Şengün and these other pieces that you ultimately have. Coming up, I do want to talk about Reed Sheppard starting in place of Jabari Smith Jr., what we saw out of this version of the Rockets starting lineup, and more. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. College basketball is nonstop. Big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night. From early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts, there's always action on the board. And now FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. You can build any college hoops parlay you want, rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever fits your read. You can mix spreads, totals, and player props to match exactly how you see the slate playing out. Then you can apply the profit boost and instantly bump up the potential payout. It's really that simple. Go safe, go bold, ride with the team you've been following all season long. It's your parlay, your style, now with more upside behind it. So head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. Today's episode is also brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to fill still sitting open when the pressure's on and you need the right hire. This is a job for Indeed-sponsored jobs. Indeed-sponsored jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for, skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute that I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help your job get the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire. This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Want to talk a little bit about Reed Sheppard starting in place of Jabari Smith Jr. We'll also talk about Tari Eason, who had a really rough go of it in this game. This was a brutal Tari Eason game. Starting with the Reed stuff here, it was great seeing Reed in the starting lineup again. It's unfortunate that his 6-1 starting record has now been marred down to 6-2 with this loss, but 14 points on 5 of 14 shooting, 14 points on 14 shots, not terribly great. He wasn't very effective inside the arc, unfortunately. This seems to happen a lot with Reed. He'll have a game where he has games where he's on from 3 and struggles inside the arc, or flip it where he struggles from 3 and he's on inside the arc. But again, the encouraging thing for a very young year 2 player is the fact that he's consistently getting to that point where he's, okay, cool, the 3 ball's not on, he's got it going inside the arc, or he's driving and he's finishing around the rim or getting to his float game, cool, or the inverse of that, right? He's getting smothered inside the rim, can't really convert inside, but the 3 ball is falling, which is encouraging, right? And when it's those lightning in a bottle games where he puts the 2 together, right, where he's got it going inside the arc and outside the arc, where you're like, holy crap, this kid is sensational on offense. But 14 points, 4 of 11 from downtown. That is a respectable number there. And it's great actually seeing the Rockets. It was great seeing Reed get up a volume of threes, because that's something this Rockets team hasn't really been able to do this season, right? Their 2 volume 3-point shooters were Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green, and those 2 guys went out the door due to injury in the KD trade. And so their 3-point shooting numbers have just been all over the place this season, where they've had some of the lowest 3-point frequency all year. So having a guy that's actually able to bomb from deep and do it on volume is encouraging. But 14 points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists, a steal, and no turnovers in 36 minutes of run. And frankly, for the most part, the issues with the Rockets defensively did not stem from anything to do with Reed Sheppard. Was there a play or two, sure, where he, straight line drive from Jaime Jaquez on a switch or whatever, where Reed gets kind of bulldozed or bodied? Yeah, absolutely. But he also made some plays. He had some moments with quick hands, and, Reed has kind of grown into his game to where I think we are beyond the point of, oh, he's a defensive liability, he can't play. What Reed gives you offensively and consistently on offense on a game-to-game basis far outweighs any perceived defensive limitations that he's got at this point in his career. Now, where things get a little frustrating here is every single one of the 8 games in which Reed Sheppard has started for this Rockets team, which, mind you, they're 6-2 in those games. Every single one of those games has come at the expense of somebody else, some other player, some other key rotation guy being out. And I think every single time it's either been one of Kevin Durant, Jabari Smith Jr., or Ime Thompson, if I'm not mistaken. One of them might have been Tari. But basically, what my point here is, Reed gets to start when the Rockets are not at full strength. How much better could this game have looked if the Rockets were actually at full strength and if they actually had Jabari Smith Jr. services? And I don't care whether you bring Jabari off the bench, whether you bring Tari off the bench. Hell, you could bring Ime Thompson off the bench. Point being is, had the Rockets had that additional key rotation guy, that additional depth, that additional guy to rely on for some production over the course of this game, maybe we're talking about another win, right? Instead, every single Reed Sheppard game we've seen has been, or every single game in which Reed Sheppard has started, has been when the team is at a distinct disadvantage. So we don't even have, of our 8-game sample size of Reed Sheppard starting, it's not even a fair 8-game sample size, because the Rockets have not been whole in any one of those 8 games. And when I say whole, obviously I'm not even factoring in missing Fred or Steve-O or any of that. I'm just talking about the guys that are healthy and available right now. So again, in this game, right? No Jabari Smith Jr. How nice would it have been to have Jabari's production off the bench in place of, I guess Jeff was okay. Uncle Jeff getting some run in this game, the gray beard, That's what they were calling him on the broadcast. But how great would it have been to see Jabari in this game with, a solid, 12 and 8 off the bench instead of Dorian Finney-Smith with zeros across the board, 0 for 2 from 3, still struggling defensively. Like, it would have made a world of difference. And so I'll be honest, I'm done. If I held my breath on this, I'd probably pass out, because as soon as Jabari's healthy, he's just going to get reinserted back to the starting lineup. Reed Sheppard's going to go back to the bench, and it's going to be what it is, because that's what Ime Udoka has decided this Rockets team needs this season. He's decided Reed Sheppard off the bench. Doesn't matter how good he's been. He's probably not going to start consistently when everybody's healthy. He's settled in on Amin, Tari, Jabari, KD, Şengün as his starting 5. I would be shocked if that changes once Jabari comes back. But once Jabari does come back, what the conversation should be is who starts between Jabari or Tari, because Reed Sheppard shouldn't ever leave the starting lineup, at least not until Fred VanVleet's healthy next year. And even that's an argument to be had for down the line. But frankly, this was a game with Tari's struggles, right? Oh my God. Tari was making me want to pull my hair out watching this game, man. The number of mistakes that he had was just painful. He had a bunch of blown layups around the rim. He had multiple fouls for and one opportunities. He had one at the end of the third quarter on Jaime Jaquez. He had the and one opportunity that he gift wrapped to Wiggins with 2 minutes left that made the score. It was 108-103, right? 2-possession game, 5-point lead, nothing crazy, nothing insurmountable, but to give the Heat 3 points right there on an and one foul on Andrew Wiggins, just not good basketball IQ, right? And not only that, he got there was a transition play where he didn't pick up a man in transition, gave up a wide open 3 because of it, and Ime Udoka chewed him out in the huddle, and they were like yelling back and forth. Like Tari was like getting aggressive with Ime on the bench. Just not a great game from Tari Eason, unfortunately. And I think there's a legitimate argument to be had between it feels frustrating, because I think the argument should be, who do you start between Tari and Jabari to round out the starting 5? Who better complements the other 4 guys? Who's the more, important defensive piece? Because I do think there's arguments. Tari's the better point of attack defender, better perimeter defender, but he's kind of a wild card on defense, right? He gambles a lot. He's a defensive chaotic force. Jabari is the more steady of the 2 guys. He's the longer player, the better rebounder, gives you better rim protection, but Jabari is also not as individually talented guarding one-on-one. He's not as good of a point of attack defender, and so that makes the Rockets perimeter defense a little bit more susceptible. And if Jabari's already out on the perimeter guarding somebody, then it kind of neutralizes his ability to be that rim deterrent if he's not able to kind of lurk and be near the rim. So there's a lot to unpack. There are legitimate arguments on both sides between who should start between Tari and Jabari if the Rockets were to continue starting Reed Sheppard. But as disappointing as it is, I'm just kind of resigned to the fact that Reed Sheppard's not going to continue to start, and that Ime Udoka is going to go back to starting Jabari as soon as he's available, and that'll be that. So we'll see what will ultimately happen. Jabari is scheduled to be back for the Thursday night game against the Warriors. And when he is back, we'll see if the starting lineup gets shifted back to what it was and Reed Sheppard heads back to the bench. That shouldn't really be the case, because Reed Sheppard does a good job when he's out there, right? He initiates offense well, and this Rockets team clearly needs what he can provide them, but they also need Reed Sheppard in the starting lineup, and they need Amin Thompson back playing the role that he used to have, and they need Alperen Şengün playing defense at the level that he used to be able to play at, and they need whichever one of the Aries is in the starting lineup to be a consistent knockdown 3-point shooter, and Kevin Durant just gets to keep doing Kevin Durant things because he's KD. Shout out to KD for getting into it with Tyler Herro. Tyler Herro talked about the burners, and KD didn't really appreciate that very much, although they dapped it up after the game, so clearly no bad blood there, although there was certainly some animosity during the game in this one. I don't know. I'm curious your thoughts. If Reed Sheppard were to stay in the starting lineup, one, do you want Reed Sheppard to stay in the starting lineup? Certainly feels like a majority of Rockets fans want that at this point. So do you want Reed Sheppard in the starting lineup? And then 2, who do you start in that 5th spot between Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason if Reed Sheppard is in your starting 5? I personally would lean Tari Eason. But this game in particular made me question that. Made me think, man, maybe Jabari Smith Jr. is more important to the structural integrity of that starting lineup than I give him credit for. Maybe I'm at the point where I'm underrating Jabari Smith Jr. and his impact for this team at this stage. But I'm very curious your thoughts on this game in particular. What stood out to you from the loss against the Miami Heat? What do you feel about some of the lineup and personnel decisions? How do you feel like Ime Udoka is utilizing Sengun and Ime Thompson? Give me your thoughts on everything we talked about in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.